There are photographs that capture joy, and then there are photographs that become evidence. On an ordinary Tuesday morning, Mara Chen sat across from Dr. Patel in an examination room that smelled of antiseptic and secrets, watching her daughter Willa pick at the paper covering the medical table. She'd brought her in for what seemed like routine concerns. Willa's sudden fear of the pool she once loved, a withdrawn quality that had settled over her like fog. She expected advice on behavioral therapy, maybe a medication adjustment. She never expected the doctor to turn the ultrasound monitor toward her and say the words that stopped time itself. "Your daughter is approximately 14 weeks pregnant." Her vision narrowed. Impossible. Obscene. Willa was 18. Yes, but she was also nonverbal. Completely dependent. Living in a world where she couldn't consent to a glass of water without someone interpreting her needs. In the car ride home, Mara's hands were ice on the steering wheel even as California sun beat through the windshield. She ran through every possibility. Every person who'd ever been alone with Willa, no one. Their home was a fortress. Their routines were sacred. That night she couldn't sleep. At 3 a.m., she heard the soft blue glow of Elias's laptop from his home office. A notification sound cutting through the silence. A sound she'd heard 1,000 times before, but never questioned. Tonight, it felt like a door opening. She moved toward it like a sleepwalker. When she bypassed his password, their anniversary, always their anniversary, and opened the hidden partition titled Evidence. What she discovered didn't just break her heart. It revealed that the man she'd trusted with her life had been living in a parallel reality for months, one where he already knew the monster's name. Mara Chen was born in 1982 in San Jose, California, the daughter of Taiwanese immigrants who'd arrived in America with engineering degrees that meant nothing and ambitions that meant everything. Her father worked the night shift at a semiconductor plant. Her mother altered clothes in a dim back room of a dry cleaner, her eyes straining under fluorescent lights until she could barely see. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment where Mara shared a room with her grandmother, who spoke only Mandarin and told stories of a Taiwan she'd never see again. From the moment Mara could understand words, she understood expectations. Excellence wasn't optional, it was oxygen. She graduated valedictorian from her high school in 2000, earned a scholarship to UC Berkeley, and was 3 years into a promising career as a user experience designer at a tech startup when everything changed. At 28, she married Elias Frost, a project manager she'd met through work. He was methodical where she was creative, calm where she was intense. They balanced each other. When Mara discovered she was pregnant in 2006, they turned the second bedroom of their Mountain View condo into a nursery painted in soft yellows and greens. Elias installed smart monitors and researched the highest-rated pediatricians. They read parenting books together on the couch, his hand on her growing belly, building a future in whispers. But when Willa arrived that December, she came with a diagnosis that rewrote their entire story. The neurologist explained it with charts and compassion. Severe developmental delays, nonverbal, requiring full-time care for the rest of her life. Mara watched Elias's face as the doctor spoke, watched him absorb each word like a physical blow. But unlike the stories Mara had heard, the fathers who fled, who couldn't handle it, Elias leaned in closer. He quit his job 2 months later to become Willa's primary caregiver while Mara worked remotely. He learned sign language, sensory integration techniques, how to read the smallest flicker in their daughter's eyes. For 12 years, they were an unbreakable team. They documented everything on social media. Willa's first time in the pool, her face lit with wonder. Holiday photos where all 3 of them wore matching pajamas. The specialized swing Elias built in their backyard. To the outside world, they were inspiration. To themselves, they were just surviving, one beautiful, exhausting day at a time. Mara had sacrificed her career trajectory, watched younger colleagues get promoted while she took calls from Willa's school, rearranged meetings around therapy appointments. She'd stopped going to book club, stopped seeing friends who didn't understand why she couldn't just get a babysitter, but she'd never once doubted that she and Elias were facing the same direction, fighting the same fight, until the night she opened that laptop and realized her husband had been waging a war she knew nothing about. Chapter 1. The ultrasound room was designed for joy. There were cartoon animals on the walls, smiling giraffes and elephants wearing bow ties, and a box of tissues on the counter that Mara assumed was for happy tears. Dr. Patel had dimmed the lights and warmed the gel before placing the transducer on Willa's abdomen, murmuring gentle reassurances, even though Willa couldn't respond with words. Mara held her daughter's hand, expecting to hear about a digestive issue, maybe an ovarian cyst that would explain the swelling. Then the room filled with sound, a rapid, determined pulse, rhythmic, unmistakable. Mara's brain rejected the information before it could fully form into thought. Dr. Patel's face appeared in the blue glow of the monitor, and Mara watched her lips move, watched the words take shape, but they seemed to arrive from very far away. Mara, I need you to listen carefully. Willa is pregnant, approximately 14 weeks based on the measurements. The cartoon elephants blurred. Mara heard herself laugh, a sharp, brittle sound. That's not possible. Dr. Patel's hand covered hers. I know this is shocking. I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to know that I'm required by law to file a report with Adult Protective Services. Willa cannot consent, which means this is a criminal matter. Criminal. The word landed like a stone in dark water, sending ripples through every certainty Mara had built her life upon. She looked at Willa, who was gazing at the ceiling tiles with that serene detachment she sometimes inhabited, and felt a rage so pure it made her teeth ache. Someone had touched her daughter. Someone had violated the sanctuary they'd built, the routines they'd perfected, the carefully vetted circle of trust that included only therapists with background checks, family members, a handful of trained caregivers. Who has access to Willa? Dr. Patel's voice was gentle but relentless. Mara's mind scrolled through faces like shuffling cards. Her father, me, Julian, her therapist. He's been with us for 3 years. The respite worker, Maria, but she's only there when we're home. No one else. We don't leave her alone, ever. Dr. Patel made notes on her tablet, each tap of her stylus feeling like an accusation. I'm going to need contact information for everyone you just mentioned. The police will want to conduct interviews. Police. Interviews. Mara's carefully constructed world was already becoming a crime scene, and she hadn't even left the room yet. She signed forms with shaking hands, her signature barely recognizable. Dr. Patel scheduled a follow-up appointment and mentioned options with the careful neutrality of someone who'd had this conversation before, probably more times than Mara wanted to imagine. In the parking lot, Mara sat in the driver's seat while Willa hummed softly beside her, completely unaware that everything had changed. The California sun was obscene in its brightness, the day continuing as if the universe hadn't just cracked open. Mara gripped the steering wheel and forced herself to breathe. Someone had done this. Someone whose face she knew, whose hand she'd probably shaken, had stolen something irreplaceable from her daughter, and Mara was going to find out who. If this story moved you, left you speechless, or made you think twice about the people you trust, hit that subscribe button. When Justice Speaks brings you the most shocking true crime. Stories where silence is finally broken. New cases every week. Don't miss what happens next. Chapter 2. Mara couldn't bring herself to go inside immediately. She sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, watching their house through the windshield like it was a stranger's home. The cheerful yellow trim Elias had repainted last summer. The ramp he'd built with precision and pride. The window boxes where he grew herbs because he'd read that sensory. Gardens were good for Willa. Every detail screamed safety, routine, love. One of those details was a lie. When she finally helped Willa inside, Elias was in the kitchen preparing dinner, humming along to a podcast about ancient Rome. He looked up with that familiar smile, the one that had carried them through 1,000 difficult days, and it died the moment he saw Mara's face. What happened? He crossed the room in 3 strides, hands reaching for her shoulders. Is she okay? Are you okay? Mara set her purse down with deliberate care. Willa's pregnant. She watched him process it. Watched his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then something else. Something that flickered too fast for her to name before it disappeared, behind a mask of shock. That's impossible. How, when, his voice cracked. Jesus Christ, Mara, who? That's what I keep asking. Myself. She moved past him to pour a glass of water she didn't want, just to have something to do with her hands. Dr. Patel said 14 weeks. So sometime in early September. Who was here in September? Elias started pacing, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood. Maria came twice a week for respite care, but we were always home. Julian had his standing Tuesday and Thursday sessions. And, he stopped abruptly, did you call the police? The doctor filed a report. They'll be contacting us. Good. Good. But his hands were shaking as he ran them through his hair. He looked almost frantic, his normally measured demeanor cracking at the edges. We need to make a list. Everyone who's been in this house. Everyone who's been alone with her for even 5 minutes. Mara studied her husband. In 18 years together, she'd seen him handle crisis after crisis with an almost mechanical calm. When Willa had a seizure at age 4, when the insurance company denied her wheelchair, when the school tried to place her in the wrong classroom, Elias was the one who stayed level, who made the spreadsheets, who talked Mara down from the ledge. This wasn't that. This was something jagged and raw. Julian, Mara said, testing the name. You trust him, right? Elias's jaw tightened. I did. Did, past tense. Mara felt something cold settle in her stomach. What does that mean? It means I don't know who to trust anymore. He turned away from her, gripping the counter. Someone did this to our daughter. In our home. Under our watch. The way he said it made it sound like a confession. That night after Willa was asleep, Mara stood in the hallway outside Elias's office, listening to him on the phone with someone, his voice low and urgent. She couldn't make out the words, only the tone, angry, determined, almost dangerous. She'd never heard her husband sound like that before. Chapter 3. Mara woke at 2:47 a.m. to an empty bed. The sheets on Elias's side were cold, which meant he'd been gone for more than a few minutes. She lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of their house, the hum of Willa's white noise machine down the hall, the occasional creak of settling wood, the distant hum of the refrigerator. And then she heard it, the soft click of keyboard keys from Elias's office. She found him hunched over his laptop, still wearing the same clothes from dinner, his face illuminated by the blue-white glow of the screen. He was so absorbed he didn't hear her approach. For a moment, she stood in the doorway, watching him scroll through something, with the intensity of a man searching for coordinates to a buried treasure. Elias? He slammed the laptop shut so violently she flinched. Christ, Mara, you scared me. It's 3 a.m. What are you doing? Work stuff. Couldn't sleep. He rubbed his face, and she noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the tightness around his mouth. Go back to bed. I'll be there soon. But he didn't move toward the door, and she didn't move away from it. You haven't been to work in 2 weeks, Mara said quietly. I checked the calendar. You've been calling in sick? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Elias's hand rested on the closed laptop, protective, possessive. I've been taking personal time. With everything happening with Willa, I needed to... To what? He stood abruptly, the chair rolling backward. To think, to figure things out. I'm going to take a shower. He moved past her, not meeting her eyes, leaving the laptop on the desk. Mara listened to his footsteps retreat down the hallway, heard the bathroom door close, heard the water start. She looked at the laptop. They'd always had each other's passwords, their anniversary. May 15th rendered in numbers. No secrets. That was the foundation they'd built. Her hands trembled as she opened the screen. The desktop looked normal at first. Work folders, family photos, a document titled Insurance, Claims. But her eyes caught on something in the corner, a folder with no name. Just a series of numbers, 091224, September 12th, 2024. Exactly. 14 weeks ago. She double-clicked. Password protected. She tried their anniversary. Invalid. She tried. Willa's birthday. Invalid. She tried her own birthday. Then Elias's. Invalid, invalid, invalid. The water was still running. She had maybe 5 minutes. On impulse, she tried Julian's last name. Patterson. The folder opened. What she saw made her stomach drop. Dozens of subfolders, each labeled with dates and times. Video files. Audio recordings, GPS logs. Photographs of a house she didn't recognize, taken from a car. Time stamped at different hours of the day and night. A spreadsheet tracking movements, arrivals, departures, patterns, and at the center of it all, a document titled simply, Evidence. The shower shut off. Mara closed the laptop with shaking hands and backed out of the office, her heart hammering against her ribs. She made it to the bedroom seconds before Elias emerged from the bathroom, steam following him like a ghost. He smiled at her. "Coming to bed?" She nodded, unable to speak. Her husband was hunting someone. Chapter 4. Mara waited until Elias left the house the next morning, another supposed work meeting that she now knew was a lie before she returned to his office. Her hands were steadier this time, fueled by something harder than fear. She needed to understand what her husband had become in the shadows of their marriage. The folder opened on the first try. She'd memorized the password in the dark, Patterson. She started with the videos, clicking on the oldest file dated September 3rd. The footage was grainy, shot from a high angle, and it took her a moment to recognize what she was seeing. Willa's bedroom, the purple walls they'd painted together, the constellation nightlight, the specialized bed with rails that Elias had spent weeks researching, and a camera she'd never known existed. Hidden somewhere near the ceiling, recording everything, Mara's breath caught in her chest. She scrolled through the files. There were dozens of them, organized by date, each several hours long. September 3rd, September 5th, September 10th, September 12th, all time-stamped, all labeled with clinical precision. She clicked on September 12th and dragged the playback bar forward, watching her daughter's empty room at high speed. Nothing. Nothing. Then, at 14:23:07, the door opened. A man entered. Mara's finger froze on the mouse. She watched him move into the frame, watched him approach. Willa's bed where her daughter lay during her afternoon rest period. The angle was wrong. She could see his body, his movements, but his face was turned away from the camera, obscured by the deliberate tilt of his head, as if he knew exactly where the lens was positioned. He wore dark jeans and a gray hoodie, generic, anonymous, but there was something familiar in the way he moved. The slope of his shoulders, the cadence of his gait. The timestamp showed he stayed for 18 minutes. Mara felt bile rise in her throat. She fast-forwarded through other files, finding similar visits. September 15th, September 19th of September, 24th, always in the afternoon, always when she was at her remote work meetings in the converted garage office, always when Elias was supposedly running errands or at the gym, except Elias had known. He'd installed the cameras. He'd been watching. He'd been collecting evidence while she lived in blissful, ignorant routine. Why hadn't he told her? She opened the audio files next, pulling on the headphones Elias used for his project calls. The first recording was from a therapy session. Julian's voice, professional and warm, talking Willa through a sensory exercise. Nothing unusual. She skipped ahead to later files. Then she heard it. A shift in Julian's tone, subtle but unmistakable. The professional distance collapsing into something intimate, inappropriate. Words that made her skin crawl. "You're so beautiful when you're calm like this. Do you know that? So peaceful." Mara ripped the headphones off. The evidence was devastating, comprehensive, methodical. Elias had known for months. While she'd been sending cheerful emails to Julian about scheduling, while she'd been thanking him for his dedication, while she'd been inviting him to Willa's birthday celebration, her husband had been building a case in silence, or building something else entirely. Chapter 5. The search history read like a descent into obsession. Mara clicked through Elias's browser tabs, each one a window into a mind she no longer recognized. The earliest searches were almost reasonable. Signs of abuse in nonverbal adults. How to collect evidence for police. Statute of limitations, sexual assault. California. The questions. Of a father trying to understand the legal system, trying to do the right thing. But then the searches changed. How long does DNA stay viable for paternity? Test. Anonymous. Tips to police effectiveness rate. How to track someone without them knowing. GPS tracker for vehicle legal. California. Unregistered burner phone. And then, chillingly, self-defense laws. California. Stand your ground. State. Justifiable homicide precedents. Mara's mouth went dry. She clicked on the browser history, scrolling back weeks. Elias had visited the same addresses repeatedly. Julian's apartment complex on Maple Street, the therapy clinic where he worked, a gym in Sunnyvale, a coffee shop. Elias had been mapping Julian's entire life, learning his patterns with the precision of a surveillance expert. But it wasn't just Julian. She found another folder buried 3 layers deep. This one labeled simply DM. She opened it, and her screen filled with photographs. David Morris, Willa's physical therapist. The cheerful man who came every Wednesday and Friday, who had worked with Willa since she was 12, who brought her small gifts and made her laugh with his exaggerated facial expressions. The most recent photo was a headshot, probably pulled from the clinic's website. Someone had drawn a red X across David's face using digital markup tools. Beneath it, a document titled DM Timeline. Mara clicked it open. It was a spreadsheet. Dates, times, locations. Every session David had conducted with Willa for the past 6 months, cross-referenced with Mara's work calendar, with Elias's supposed schedule. Highlighted entries marked occasions when David had been alone with Willa for more than 10 minutes. But unlike the Julian folder, this one had a notation at the bottom, dated 3 weeks ago. Ruled out. Security footage from clinic confirms alibi for all flagged dates. No access during window of conception. Elias had investigated David thoroughly, systematically, and then eliminated him as a suspect. The realization hit Mara like ice water. Her husband had been conducting his own investigation, parallel to anything the police might do. He'd installed cameras. He'd tracked movements. He'd built dossiers on every man who'd ever been alone with their daughter. She found another folder. MC, Maria's cousin. Another. RP, respite program. Volunteer. Each one contained the same obsessive documentation, photos, schedules, alibis, and each one eventually marked cleared. All except Julian. Julian's folder had no such notation. It simply grew thicker, more detailed, more damning with each passing day. The most recent document was titled Address Verification and contained photos of a cabin, remote and isolated, surrounded by redwood trees. The GPS coordinates were noted in the margin. The timestamp was from yesterday. Below the coordinates, Elias had typed a single line, Saturday, 8 p.m. settlement. Today was Friday. Chapter 6. Mara was waiting in the kitchen when Elias came home that evening. The laptop open on the table between them like evidence at trial. He stopped in the doorway, grocery bags hanging from his hands, and she watched the color drain from his face. Mara, how long? Her voice was steady, which surprised her. How long have you known? The bags slipped from his fingers, oranges rolling across the floor. He didn't move to pick them up. I can explain. September 3rd. That's when you installed the camera in Willa's room. She turned the laptop toward him. The frozen frame showing, Julian's obscured face hovering over their daughter's bed. You've known for almost 4 months. Elias sagged against the doorframe. For a moment, she thought he might collapse entirely. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I needed to be sure. Sure? The word came out like a slap. You needed to be sure that someone was raping our daughter? I needed proof. He moved into the room, hands raised like he was approaching a wild animal. The police, Mara, do you know what happens in these cases? It becomes he said, she said, except Willa can't say anything. I needed irrefutable evidence. So you just watched? You let it keep happening? I only had suspicions at first. He was talking faster now, desperate. Willa started acting strange around Julian in late August. Wouldn't make eye contact. Seemed anxious when I'd mention his sessions. I thought maybe I was paranoid, reading into things. So I installed the camera to either confirm or eliminate him. And when you confirmed it? Elias's jaw clenched. I wanted to kill him. The honesty of it stunned her into silence. I would lie awake at night, he continued, his voice cracking, planning it. How I'd do it, where, how I'd make it look. I'd drive to his apartment at 2 in the morning and just sit there, imagining walking up to his door. He looked at her, with eyes that were hollow and ancient. I'm not a violent man, Mara, but I have never wanted anything more than I wanted to hurt him. So why didn't you go to the police? Because I knew what would happen. He pulled out a chair and sat heavily. They'd open an investigation. It would take months, maybe years. Julian would lawyer up, claim the videos were misinterpreted. that he was just adjusting her positioning. And in the meantime, Willa would be subjected to forensic interviews, medical exams, court appearances. They might even remove her from our care during the investigation. Claim we failed to protect her. That's not... It happens, Mara. I researched it. I found cases where disabled victims were placed in state facilities during trials because the system decided the parents were negligent. His hands were shaking. I couldn't risk losing her. Not after she'd already lost so much. So your solution was to become a vigilante. He met her eyes, and what she saw there terrified her. My solution was to make sure justice happened, one way or another. Chapter 7. The doorbell rang. Mara and Elias froze, staring at each other across the kitchen table, like two conspirators caught in the act. The cheerful chime echoed through the house, followed by a familiar voice calling out, "Hello? It's Julian! Sorry, I'm a few minutes early." Mara's blood turned to ice. She looked at Elias, whose face had gone completely blank. The kind of blank that comes before an explosion. His hand moved slowly to the knife block on the counter. "Don't!" She grabbed his wrist, her grip fierce. "We act normal. Do you understand me?" "Normal? I can't..." His voice was strangled. "I can't let him near her." "You will." She stood, smoothing her shirt with trembling hands. "Because if you do anything right now, you'll go to prison, and Willa will have no one. We play this exactly right, or we lose everything." The doorbell rang again. "Mrs. Chen? Everything okay?" Mara walked to the front door on legs that didn't feel like her own. She could hear Elias behind her, breathing like a wounded animal. When she opened the door, Julian stood there with his usual warm smile, messenger bag slung over his shoulder, holding a small potted succulent. "Thought Willa might like this for her windowsill," he said, offering it to her. "How's our girl doing today?" Our girl! The possessiveness of it made Mara's stomach turn. She forced her lips into something resembling a smile. "She's resting." "I actually forgot you were coming today. It's on the calendar." Julian stepped past her, into the house with the ease of someone who'd done it 100 times. "Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork. 3 years, and I don't think I've missed a session yet. 3 years. Mara tried to remember when it had started, when the professional boundaries had dissolved, when he'd stopped being the kind therapist and become something monstrous. She wanted to claw his eyes out. Elias appeared in the hallway, and Mara watched Julian's expression shift just slightly, just for a microsecond, into something wary. He'd noticed the tension. "Elias. Didn't expect to see you. Home." Julian's smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. "Usually you're at the gym this time of day." So he knew their schedules. Of course he did. He'd been studying them, learning when to strike. "Took the afternoon off," Elias said flatly. "Thought I'd observe the session today." A flicker of genuine alarm crossed Julian's face before he masked it. "That's great. Always happy to have parents involved." He adjusted his messenger bag. "Should we get started? I don't want to disrupt Willa's routine." Mara watched him walk toward Willa's room. This man who'd violated their sanctuary, who'd smiled at birthday parties and accepted their gratitude and their trust. He paused at Willa's door, hand on the knob, and looked back at them. "You two look tense. Everything all right?" Elias's hand was clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Mara stepped between them. "Just a long day," she said. "We'll be right here in the living room if you need anything." Julian's smile returned, but it looked painted on. "Perfect. We'll keep the door open like always." Like always, as if that had ever protected Willa. Chapter 8. Mara sat on the couch, her body angled toward Willa's room, where Julian's voice drifted out in practiced therapeutic tones, while her mind raced through the implications of everything she'd discovered. Elias paced like a caged animal, his eyes never leaving the hallway. Every minute felt like an hour. When Julian finally emerged, 45 minutes later, looking relaxed and professional, Mara forced herself to stand and smile. How did she do? "Great progress on her tactile responses," Julian said, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "Same time Thursday?" "Actually," Elias said, his voice tight, "I wanted to talk to you about something." "Could you stay a few minutes?" Julian's eyes darted between them. "I have another client at 4. It won't take long." Elias was already moving toward his office. "It's about some new equipment for Willa. I value your professional opinion." The lie was smooth enough that Julian followed, though Mara noticed his shoulders tense as they entered the office. She trailed behind, her heart hammering. Elias closed the door behind them and locked it. What's going on? Julian's professional mask was cracking now, genuine unease seeping through. Instead of answering, Elias pulled a USB drive from his desk drawer and plugged it into his computer. The screen flickered to life, showing video footage, not from Willa's room this time, but from this very office. The timestamp read November 8th, 2024, 3 weeks ago. Mara watched her own confusion mirror Julian's as the recording played. It showed this same room, but Elias was alone, sitting exactly where he sat now. Then the door opened and Julian entered, younger Julian, unsuspecting Julian from 3 weeks ago. The recorded Elias's voice was calm. Thanks for coming. I told Mara this was about updating our therapy contract. But I actually need to talk to you about something else. Mara's breath caught. She hadn't known about this meeting. On screen, Julian looked wary. Okay, I need you to tell me the truth about your relationship with Willa. The color drained from video Julian's face. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Recorded Elias pulled out a tablet, swiping through images. Mara couldn't see what they showed. But she watched. Julian's face transformed from confusion to horror to something like resignation. Where did you get those? His voice was barely a whisper. From the camera in her room, the one that's been recording since September. A long, terrible silence stretched out on the recording. Then Julian collapsed into the chair across from Elias, his head in his hands. I never meant... His voice broke. It wasn't supposed to happen. I tried to stop. I tried so many times. How long? Elias's recorded voice was steady, clinical, but Mara could hear the rage beneath it. 2 months, maybe 3. I can't. Did you know she was pregnant? Julian's head snapped up. What? Answer the question. No. Oh God, no. Is she... The video ended. Elias turned to face the real Julian, who stood pressed against the door, his face ashen. Did you really think I'd let you keep coming here? Elias asked softly. Julian's hand went to the doorknob, finding it locked. I can explain. You already did. Chapter 9. The police arrived within 20 minutes of Mara's call. She watched through the window as they led Julian out in handcuffs, his head bowed. His expensive messenger bag left abandoned on their entryway floor like a shed skin. Neighbors emerged onto porches, phones raised, already texting their versions of events into the neighborhood gossip chain. The perfect family's perfect life, finally revealed as the fragile construction it had always been. Detective Sarah Chen, no relation, she'd clarified gently, sat with them for 3 hours taking statements, collecting the USB drive, the laptop, the folders of evidence Elias had compiled. She called it extensive and meticulous, but also potentially problematic given that Elias had continued surveillance without involving law enforcement. There would be questions about that. Lawyers would need to be consulted. The DA would have concerns about chain of custody, about vigilante justice, about fathers who took the law into their own hands. But the evidence was damning enough that Julian wouldn't see freedom for a very long time. 2 weeks later, Mara sat in the garden Elias had built for Willa, watching her daughter's hands trace patterns in a shallow basin of water. The morning sun was gentle, the kind of light that made everything look salvageable. Willa's belly was visible now, unmistakable, a reality they could no longer hide behind loose clothing and careful camera angles. They'd stopped posting on social media, stopped pretending. Elias emerged from the house carrying 2 mugs of coffee, his movements slower than they used to be, weighted with exhaustion, and guilt and something that might eventually become healing. He sat beside Mara without speaking, and for a long moment they simply watched their daughter play. The genetic counselor called, Mara said finally. They can do the amniocentesis next week if we want. Do you want to? She considered the question. What they wanted seemed so small compared to what was happening. The life growing inside Willa, whether they wanted it or not. I think we need to know what we're preparing for. Elias nodded slowly. Dr. Patel mentioned the adoption agency again. I know. They'd been sent brochures, glossy photos of smiling couples, promises of open adoptions, support systems, futures where this child could thrive with parents who'd chosen them. It all made sense on paper. It all felt like abandonment in her heart. "What if we kept the baby?" The words escaped before Mara could stop them. Elias turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his exhausted features. "Mara, I know it's complicated. I know it's potentially traumatic for Willa. I know every therapist we've consulted has said it might not be advisable." She watched Willa's fingers create ripples. "But this child didn't ask to be conceived in violence. And Willa didn't ask for any of this either. We can barely manage now." "I know." The silence stretched between them, filled with all the uncertainties they'd have to navigate. The trauma, the therapy, the judgment from people who would never understand. The possibility that they were making another terrible mistake in a series of mistakes that had led them here. But also the possibility of something else. Something neither of them could name yet. Willa looked up at them and smiled, water dripping from her fingertips, completely unaware of the choice being weighed in the air above her head, the choice that would define all of their futures. Mara reached for Elias's hand. "We'll figure it out," she said. It wasn't a promise. It was all they had.